No one is defending Russia. What honest, sane, critical thinking people are doing is acknowledging the extreme power imbalance in world affairs. Given that you have one global superpower which literally controls the entire world. Of course we are more critical of the United States. The United States deserves it. America is the only global superpower. It is largely responsible for the state of the world. The United States has the lion's share of war crimes. It has the lion's share of human rights abuses. Given that we have in NATO a global military intervention force run by the US, which controls the world's energy supply, it controls the world's pipelines and the sea lanes, and props up militarily the US-dominated financial system. NATO is an alliance born out of the Cold War. When the Cold War ended, NATO should have been disbanded. Much like the Warsaw Pact, which was the Russian counterpart to NATO, much like the Warsaw Pact disbanded, much like the Soviet Union disbanded. It was no longer a threat. So why do we still have NATO? In fact, NATO promised not to move 1 inch eastward. That was the direct quote made by Secretary of State James Baker under President George H.W. Bush. And yet, since 1991, after the Berlin Wall fell, it has moved closer and closer to Russia's borders. And Russia has always thought of NATO as an existential threat. It has repeated its security concerns over the years. Their security concerns have never changed. If you look at the history, you look at statements, you look at foreign policy directives made by the Kremlin, they've always expressed that Ukraine was a red line. This is why we have the documentation to prove it. This is why we have senior statesmen, high-ranking US officials admitting that if NATO kept on its trajectory, on its course, that it would inevitably lead to a war with Russia. And indeed it has. That's why you have Secretary of State James Baker admitting this. That's why you have William Burns, the current head of the CIA, who was the ambassador to Russia, in a leaked document admitting the same thing. That's why you have one of the worst war criminals in the 20th century, Henry Kissinger, most unpopularly calling for the US to negotiate a diplomatic settlement with Russia. The US, via NATO and its counterparts, encroached all the way up after decades and decades, all the way up to Russia's borders. Russia has every right to feel threatened by that. That's just the nature of geopolitics. If you have a world superpower aiming nuclear weapons at your border, it's a problem.